The 1996 laws created, really overhauled the interior enforcement system. 2 years after NAFTA, 2 years after the deregulation of economic borders, we had the tightening of physical borders, and not just so at the border, not just along the border wall, virtual or iron. We had a tightening of the interior enforcement police, of the interior enforcement machinery, so that for the first time in American history, you were seeing a movement towards local public servants playing a role in immigration enforcement. Well, I've worked with immigrants who are being deported now for about 8 years, and I can safely say that when someone is arrested for misdemeanor marijuana, and we know all about misdemeanor marijuana arrests in New York City under the Giuliani administration and thereafter, right? When someone is arrested for misdemeanor marijuana in New York City, what happens to them is that they get booked, they go to Rikers Island. From Rikers Island, they're asked, what is their immigration status? What country were they born in? They've actually changed the correction space sheet to start collecting immigration information. And Homeland Security has an office space on the island, and our own corrections officers are handing information to Homeland Security to then check who might be a non-citizen. And this is a very important term to note for people who cover immigration in the news. When ICE comes out with their very sophisticated press material saying, we nabbed 66 illegal aliens, they're actually misstating terms. What they're talking about is non-citizens. So plenty of the people who are being taken up are not illegal. They are in fact non-citizens, including permanent residents, green card holders, people who presumably were on the path to citizenship. When someone is arrested for a misdemeanor marijuana conviction, before they've even pleaded guilty, they are assessed by immigration at Rikers. They are given a detainer if they are presumed to be a non-citizen. Okay, not undocumented, but a non-citizen. New York has a very old immigrant population, so plenty of the people who are picked up are in fact green card holders. And then, once they are done with their time, not in lieu of a criminal case, once they are done with their time, they are then taken into immigration custody for deportation. ICE is pushing for local public servants, namely police chiefs and sheriffs, to sign on to 287G. I saw just a few months ago in the state of New Jersey, in Morristown, New Jersey, an effort where ICE tried to get the Democratic mayor to go ahead and sign a 287G agreement. He was full of pomp, very excited about the idea. Then we did some work, talked with the Republican sheriff, and he decided, you know what, this is a huge unfunded mandate. To detain, to incarcerate just 25 immigrants under 287G, it would cost us $1.9 million. None of it's coming from the federal government. The state of Arizona is at this point the forerunner, the forefront of locally driven immigration enforcement. They are at the forefront of a very radical movement in this country to shift immigration from federal hands to local hands. And the state of Arizona right now is in a thorough crisis because of all of the state legislation they've passed to make immigration a local issue.
The criminalization of immigrants, which really isn't just simply the increased incarceration of immigrants, but the expansion of definitions of criminality for immigration purposes, that is, making it easier to deport somebody because of a crime, sort of pushes that threshold of removability further into the legal permanent resident population. So you could say that perhaps prior to 96, a great, the threat of being removed was more concentrated in the temporary legal status population, but with the expansion of the criminalization of immigrants, it's now possible for pretty much anyone except for a naturalized citizen to face the continuous threat of being removed. And really the dominant trend really has been that immigration flows or migration flows to the U.S. have been increased alongside the expansion of immigration enforcement. So where tougher immigration enforcement and more restrictions on legal status become a precondition for expanding immigration flows. And that's essentially what's really been happening, what's happening with the debate over guest workers. Now, as it turns out, over the past 10 years or so, there has been a more than doubling of the number of people that are deported each year for criminal reasons, like from about 10,000 in 92 to over 20,000 today. But if you look at removal rates for any variety of reasons, the total number of removals per year from the 1920s, to say now, you see a clear linear increase from about 15,000 a year during the early 1920s to now over 1 million a year typically. Or that it's no longer, or in some sense, that it's a post-immigration nation, to the extent that immigrant legal status is no longer the primary gateway through which most people enter the U.S. And even for people that eventually become immigrants, the vast majority of them actually enter the U.S. through this kind of probationary status. And again, it's possible to argue, well, actually, it's the case that most people that are non-immigrants do enter the U.S. probably as tourists and short-term guests, and they actually do intend to leave after a short period of time. But there's a sizable minority of people who are granted temporary status, but who actually are entering with the hopes of becoming permanent residents.
Whenever there's been great social disorder, and particularly great migrations, youth gangs have grown up. And the reason they're youth gangs is that the problems of migration and immigration are really a problem of the second generation. The first generation's largely self-selected people who come wherever they're going by dint of their grit, and they are too busy making it with what they do. It's their children who have the problems for a lot of reasons, and particularly in the United States, the children have problems of culturalization, racism, and economics. So it's the children who tend to get into problems. Now, I hasten to add here, I haven't talked to anybody who's really looked at the question of gang numbers at any serious level, even though it's very difficult to get, who believes that any more than around 10% is the max, and maybe down around 2% of any given Latino community, I'm talking about specifically our gang members. Most Salvadorans who come to the United States, most Guatemalans, most Mexicans have only on their mind getting that golden ring. Dark networks, which are basically these criminal underground networks, have been enhanced. In many of these countries in Central America, the level of criminal violence, and incidentally, it's not all gang violence by any means. There's organized crime and there's official corruption, but the combination of this level of violence threatens democratic governance itself in some of these countries. So it's important not just to those countries, but to us if we truly believe that we all benefit by democracy in our hemisphere.
I think we all need to be hyper aware of what Democrats mean when they say comprehensive immigration reform, and I want to point particularly to legalization because there currently is a bill, the Strive Act, which is in Congress, and I think we can all remember back to the infamous HR 4437, which literally brought millions of people out onto the streets to say that's not what this country is about and we won't stand for that, and 4437 essentially died. Many of its provisions are alive and well in the Strive Act and has full Democratic support. We've also heard it from both Senator Clinton and Senator Obama that a path to legalization is one very necessary way for the country to deal with the large amount of undocumented immigrants. As it stands in the Strive Act, it just simply won't work. Many people who are getting jobs around the country who don't have papers are being encouraged to by their employers to go out and procure somehow, and it's very easy, a social security number. The statistic is about 75%. Those 75% right off the bat would not be eligible for this legalization program. What's the point? 75%. Now the other 25% who haven't maybe used a fraudulent document, you would have to get your employer, who you may have worked for I don't know how long, to sign on to the fact that they employed you illegally. I mean, come on. How many employees? Let's be real. How many employees are going to say, oh, okay, yeah, Deepa, yeah, I employed you illegally for 3 years, and you know what, you're such a good employee that I'm going to I'm going to fess up to the federal government and say I employed you illegally, off the books, so that you might have a chance to legalization. It's just not going to work. And I've had the chance to meet, follow, and stay with guest workers since 2005, and really be able to see on a very close basis what exactly this guest worker program is. And it's the program that's being pushed as the solution. The guest worker program that I have seen in action is an extremely exploitative program that works very much to the benefit of the employers. There's a lot more to the guest worker program, that we need to expand the guest worker program, and that's the solution or part of the solution to our large undocumented population. It's just simply not true.